This path that I'm walking on is quite simply a path to death. And if you think I'm over amplifying this, you'd be wrong, because I am at one of the killing fields in Cambodia, one of the largest. It's just outside Phnom Penh. And it was here that the KHMER ROUGE brought the intellectuals, the teachers, the doctors and so on, to quite simply slaughter them wholesale. Where the camera is positioned at the moment is where the trucks would stop. There's a gateway just here. I showed it in the opening shot. The trucks would come here about 3 times a month, carrying up to 30 people, all tied and blindfolded. They would be herded off those trucks and then led down this path to their inevitable death. What was down this path was a hut, and they were held in there until it was time to literally bludgeon them to death. So imagine, just for a moment, you get forced out the truck, your hands are bound, probably behind you. And you know, as you go this way, these are the very last steps that you will be taking. There's a picture on the board here. I'll show you that closer up now to give you a clearer idea as to how horrific this place is. So down the path they go, their hands bound behind them, usually with wire. They are blindfolded. Over 20,000 people were killed here. Now what we saw initially was the truck stop. It's just behind the camera. They're unloaded and they're brought to here. Now what used to be here was a large wooden hut. Their legs would be shackled to a bar that went along the ground, and they were detained for the night, knowing full well that they would be slaughtered. These people, as we know, were educated. Maybe they spoke a second language, maybe they just went to school, maybe they even just wore reading glasses. For the Pol Pot regime, these were all enough to potentially make you a subversive person, someone that was going to fight against their regime, so therefore we're going to kill you and your entire family. Do not forget that small children died here as well. Now what the KHMER ROUGE discovered at this site was when they brought the people in and they transported them from the prison, they didn't have time to kill them all in a day. Hence, they locked them up here so they could start the slaughter the very next morning. And when they came here, they were already emaciated and starving because they had come from S21, well, many of them had, which was a school in the capital of Phnom Penh, and they had already been tortured and beaten. They had already been photographed and their records taken, very much like the Nazis in Germany. Now, after watching this video, it may interest you to look in the links below of this video, because there is a video on S21 I've shot, but there's another you should watch, and that is my video on Pol Pot's secret bunker and where this tyrant, this monster, spent his last few days. In that video, I actually take you to his secret bunker and where his last refuge was, where he finally died, because he lived into his old age. And nobody has ever gone to those locations and shot a video, but I have, and I'm exceedingly proud of it, I must say. So do watch that, because it'll give you a much better idea as to why this all was. And there's another reason you should watch it, because in that video, Pol Pot has the audacity to say as to why he was not to blame. It wasn't his fault, he says in an interview. Bear in mind, he slaughtered 2 million people in 4 short years. 25% of the population was killed at locations just like this. I've decided to bring you back to the beginning because I need to put this into perspective for you, because it is tiny, this site. There are the gates where the trucks came in. They came down here and then stopped while I shot the opening of this video. Here is where the trucks would pull up. The people would be unloaded and go down here to what I called the path of death. Just think, 20,000 people trod this short path. And it was here that you would have seen the hut, the large hut which they would be detained in overnight. And there was a second building here, that of the camp commandant. And what he would do was check the paperwork, you know, to make sure they had the right people. But really, do you honestly think they ever let anyone go? It is quite simply absurd. But there's another hut that was just in this corner here that shows you how horrifying this place was. I mean, it is truly horrific, because just here was a hut that held chemicals. And the chemicals they held were DDT, you know, the pesticide. But why were the KHMER Rouge using DDT? The mystery as to why they used DDT can be answered right here. But there's not an awful lot to see. But there was a hut here with a metal roof once. I mean, bear in mind, this happened up until the late 70s. This is modern history. And in this hut were the weapons they used to kill those innocent people. But the thing was, they didn't want to waste money on bullets and ammunition. They literally beat them all to death. Now, what they used was bamboo sticks, staffs, bayonets, and so on. But to beat 300 people to death is nigh on impossible, especially when you keep in mind as to who the executioners were. These were kids. These were teenage boys. And we keep seeing this through history. It's always those young lads that you can twist with your, I don't know, cultish ideas. And it was those same kids who were S21, the prison camp, which was the school I mentioned just a moment ago. What they did was so barbaric, it moved me to tears, because I've been to Auschwitz. And what happened round here at S21 in particular, and at this location, I find more horrifying than Auschwitz. It is that scary. So here was the hut. The people have come, have been bound, and they're standing literally here. In the hut, you go and you get your small knife or your bamboo cane. And right here is where the killing begins, the wholesale slaughter of children, women, and old people. Now, I'm going to add a warning now, and it's not because I'm trying to amplify this video or something. No, I mean it, because I have a very strong imagination. And walking round here as we progress, there are clothes that are starting to emerge from the ground because rainy season has just ended. There are bones, there are people's teeth, and they're literally in the earth that we're about to walk. So if you do have an imagination like mine that gets a bit carried away, then maybe this next step is not for you. There is the location of the hut, and here is that walk I just spoke of. I've literally just turned the camera. Did they walk far? Right here. Look, this is a mass grave. 450 people were in this one grave alone. And as I move gently forward, you'll see these pits. See them? It's like a bomb site. All of these were just full of dead people. Now there's a question I didn't answer, which is why the DDT? You know, the poison. And the reason is because when they were trying to bludgeon people with those basic tools, and it's just young lads, they just wouldn't die. I mean, I've been thrown off motorcycles numerous times, you know, and bounced into such things as Volvos, and you get a broken bone and stuff, but to bludgeon someone to death is an enormously difficult task. So when they put them into these pits, they discovered that they were still wailing and screaming. Their answer to this was to try and poison them. It's just utterly bizarre. Do you recall me speaking of the rainy season just ending and how there is still remnants coming up continuously? Well, if I just kneel down, what you see here are clothes of victims. But even more so, if I zoom in, these are human teeth. To think as to how many people lay under this soil, and they're literally coming to the surface. And those that did the killing were young boys and very young men, usually extremely uneducated, drunk on alcohol and power. But they didn't get away with it. Well, many didn't. Because as the regime came to its inevitable end, they conspired to get away, to go and run to Vietnam. But there was a spy in their camp, and someone told of their plans, and many of them are still here because this is their final resting place. 166 bodies were found here, all of them without their heads, because they were also found to be traitors of the regime. And here we see victims' clothing, very much similar to what I saw in Auschwitz, but there's a big difference. And that difference is what my guide told me. Because here in Cambodia, the rainy season only ended a few weeks ago. And what keeps happening at this side is as the rain erodes the soil, it reveals yet more. It's a horror show without end. These garments have literally been found very recently, days or weeks ago. These are not, being stored here for some length of time. And amongst these rags are bones. It's like the ghosts of the innocent coming out from the soil, maybe to return to where they should be, their homelands. It's very hard not to get emotional when you see things like this. And I think maybe now I should explain a little bit more about the man behind this all, Pol Pot. If there is a single site in the whole of Cambodia that graphically shows the horror, the idiocy, the carnage that Pol Pot created, then it is right here, next to this tree, which I won't even touch. And maybe you wouldn't, if you found out what happened here. Remember that they didn't use bullets and guns to kill. They were bludgeoning people to death. Well, what do you do with the babies? Quite unbelievably, they would pick up the infants by their feet and then swing them so their heads got crushed against this tree. Often whilst the mothers were watching. I'm very rarely speechless. And standing here is just horrifying. The only time I've ever felt this emotional is, as I've mentioned, Auschwitz. There, what really got me was not the piles of clothes. It wasn't the gas chambers, which may surprise you. What got me was the railway platforms. Because as you go through the gates, Alba Machfria, work will set you free, is inscribed above them in wrought iron. And as you go through those gates, you see, you know, where the huts were and so on. But then there's the train platforms. And you can imagine the trains pulling in, the cattle cart doors being pulled back after being locked for so many days, the dead spilling out onto that platform, and the sound of guard dogs baying, and the call of "Rouse, Rouse, move, move." And all of it came alive to me on that railway platform. Because if you've got an imagination like mine, my God, what you see is horrific. And this place is beyond belief. So who was this mass murderer, this tyrant, this absolute homicidal lunatic Pol Pot? Very, very briefly, the video link is down below, as I mentioned, if you want to know more and see his secret bunker. He was educated in Paris. He came from a good family, you know. And to get an education in France was for the pure elite. It was there. He bumped in with a load of communists and he thought, oh, this is great, you know, everyone should be equal. The complete idiot came back to this country, and through circumstances, you know, the war going on in Vietnam and so on, he came to power, followed by people who felt they were dispossessed. His whole idea was everyone should work in the fields. We don't need these intellectuals. That's what this was all about, killing them off. Because what Pol Pot wanted was to go back to year zero. To build the ideal society, you had to tear it all down first. Now, allow me to explain how stupid that is. And I never said this in my other video. I was toying with the idea, but I didn't. Now I bloody well will, because this guy annoys me more and more. He was the stupidest man that ever walked this earth. And I'm about to prove that to you. Year zero, okay? We've got to destroy everything. Now let's just transfer that to a single premise. Let's say we're going to start an airline. But we want it to be, you know, Utopia Airlines, year zero, start from the beginning and all that, because that's how you make everything better, isn't it? So what we do is we destroy all the planes, we kill all the pilots and the mechanics and anyone who made any parts. We burn down the factories, and of course we dig up the runways, because that's what you would do thinking like Pol Pot. So you start your Utopia Airways, you know, the KHMER Rouge airline, and then the planes go off that we have now built on our new runways and so on. But they keep crashing. Boom! They just plough into the ground over and over again. But here's the problem. We're in the perfect society because we say so. Therefore, it's not our fault. The reason the planes keep crashing is because there's people that are colluding with the CIA. There's subversives amongst us. They don't want our perfect society with our perfect ideas to succeed. Therefore, we have to kill them. And that is how it was. And all the people that are literally emerging from the ground right here, the small children that were slaughtered against this very tree, were all seen as subversives. But the carousel that was pure carnage was on steroids, because if you took one person and said, you know, you're guilty of speaking another language, and they go, well, it's not me, I was a teacher, doesn't matter, you could be a subversive, name 20 others. And that person would be tortured, he would name 20. That 20 would be tortured, they would name. And so the numbers just kept amplifying. And no one could question and say, this is nuts, because they would then be subversive. The whole system was built on pure destruction. It was so crazy, it beggars belief. And again, I say, have a look at my video on Pol Pot, because that interview and his life is quite staggering. I assure you, I don't make any money off YouTube, so I'm not trying to amp my own work. I'm doing this as a historical project. I spent most of my time hunting down temples. Nobody really cares. But my God, it's worth knowing about. Because if you don't doubt your leaders, if you do not question why are these people being portrayed as our enemies? Why are we going to war over this issue? Then you may have one of these towers being built in your neighborhood. This is a tower full of the skulls of victims, innocent victims, dragged from their homes, thrown into a horror show of a prison camp, and then finally brought here to be executed by little more than children, who they themselves were then killed. And to think, the person that lived into a ripe old age was the architect of it all, Pol Pot. But it's inside we must go to read the final chapter. It's quite a sizable monument. I've been to a few of these in regional towns, but nothing that's on this scale. These are, of course, all skulls. And although they stare blankly at me, it's not these that shake me. The fortunate thing is I took a guide, and what most people don't know is you can squeeze through these little gaps. You can see the marks here where some have rubbed their backs against this wall. And you can actually go round. And it's here that I get truly horrified. Look at these garments. They are fresh. I don't know how well that's coming out due to the reflection of the lens, but what you can clearly see are these tools. Have a look. These are the actual tools of death. Now, I hate zooming in on these videos, but I'm going to have to, because look, we can see the evidence as to the marks they left. Now, that would have been quite a rare tool from what my guide tells me, because what was more common were these bamboo sticks. I mean, just look at it. They're no more than, I don't know, a foot long. How the hell are you supposed to beat an adult to death with that? And just above it, that black there, are the KHMER ROUGE uniforms. These are the clothing of the actual murderers that slaughtered all these people. There is more as we take another turn. And it's a small sight, but my goodness, it was money well spent. Here is something that is very horrifying. This is a bayonet. Now, what this was about was the tree where the children were killed. What the guards would do is they would throw the children into the air and then impale them on the bayonets. So throw a baby in the air and then spear it with the bayonet. It's beyond belief. So this is the monument to those innocent that died here. Young babies, mothers, old people, grandfathers and grandmothers. Every single one of them convicted of a crime they certainly did not commit. And the reason things like this happen is not because of a single man. Oh, it was Pol Pot. Oh, it was the idea, it was communism. That's where the problem lays. If you say that, you are wrong. The reason things like this happen is due to ignorance. And I want you to remember this. You can complain about your local MP, your local senator, whatever, your government and your taxes. But that is what is golden. You can complain. You can change things. You can raise your voice and say, no, this is not acceptable. All these silent skulls behind me, they couldn't say that. The regime had taken over. So please, luxuriate in your freedom. This has been Mr. B at Forgotten Temples. Yet again, I ask you to please like, subscribe and comment. And if by chance you could drop a few coins into my Patreon account, because I don't get any money from YouTube at the moment, to help me further down that dusty road to build my library of temples that are forgotten and abandoned, I would be truly grateful. And to do so, it's very easy. It's patreon.com/temples. Until next time, I ask you take the very best of care.